The rain over Detroit didn't whisper, didn't cleanse, didn't bring any cinematic redemption. It came in hard, thick, icy, a downpour with purpose, as if trying to scrub the city off the map. The gutters couldn't keep up. Water pooled at corners, slid down the shoulders of silent buildings, and beat against windows like it wanted in, like it knew the warmth inside wasn't real and wanted to make everything outside match. Inside a basement apartment with walls the color of nicotine-stained parchment, Hannah Sullivan sat on a chair that used to have 4 legs, but now required the balance of a gymnast and the surrender of someone too tired to care. She wasn't crying. That had passed. Crying belonged to people who thought someone might still hear them. In her hands, a letter. Legal paper, creased and worn at the edges from being folded, unfolded, and clutched more times than she'd admit. Notice to vacate. 15 days. The words weren't sharp. That would have been better. They were blunt, final, like the end of a sentence you didn't even know had started. She was 3 months behind on rent. She had no excuses left to offer, not even to herself. Hannah didn't read the letter again. She didn't need to. It had branded itself on her thoughts. The black ink had sunk into her nerves. The room smelled of damp plaster, old radiator heat, and the kind of loneliness that seeps into paint. Water trickled down the inside of the window pane. The wind outside howled like a thing grieving. The walls echoed back nothing. She wore her coat indoors now, not because she was going somewhere, but because she wasn't. The heat had been cut off 10 days ago. The electricity followed 3 days later. What food remained in the fridge had gone bad the same day the light inside it died. She had a single can of soup left, and she was saving it. For what? She didn't know. Her gray eyes scanned the tiny room. Mattress on the floor, a bookshelf stacked with unpaid bills, second-hand shoes lined up like obedient soldiers, their soles worn and their purpose exhausted. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the subtle panic that had become her full-time roommate. Panic that didn't scream. It whispered, "There's nowhere left to go." She reached for the eviction notice again, this time folding it with slow, deliberate care and placing it under a chipped ceramic mug. It didn't matter. It was still real, still coming. But she had done something. And when life is unraveling, sometimes doing anything feels like a protest. Hannah's stomach ached, not in the sharp way of hunger, but in that deep, hollow ache that felt too old for 30. The ache wasn't new. It had simply shifted forms over the years. She had been alone most of her life, but lately, the isolation had matured into something crueler. It didn't just haunt the room. It lived in her body now, in her breath, in her thoughts, in her memories. A drip from the ceiling echoed into a rusted pot near the fridge. She ignored it. Instead, her eyes moved to the wooden box under the bed. A sewing kit, 15 years old, edges worn soft. She slid it out carefully, reverently, like it held something sacred. Inside, a faded pincushion, a half-used spool of thread, rust-flecked scissors, buttons that no longer matched anything. Scraps of fabric, folded like love letters she had once written to a version of herself who believed in tomorrow. Hannah had learned to sew in a group home. Not formally. No teacher. Just watching. Practicing. Mending clothes for younger kids who got teased for holes in their sleeves. Stitch by stitch, she made them whole. It gave her something no one else had. Proof that she could fix things, even when no one fixed her. Once, she dreamed of being a fashion designer. Not the glamorous kind. Not runway fame or flashing bulbs. No, she wanted a small space. A studio where the sun came through the windows and every stitch she made gave someone a reason to feel seen. She held a strip of fabric now. Navy blue. Faint floral print. From a dress she never finished. A dream she folded away when life demanded survival over beauty. She exhaled. Enough. She picked up her phone, its screen cracked but still functional, and opened her messages. One unread text from Monica. Timestamped 4 hours ago. Call me. I found something. She hit call. The ringtone buzzed like a nervous breath. Then, Hannah Banana, came the voice, warm and sharp like a hug with caffeine. Took you long enough. Hannah's throat clenched. Hi. You okay? No. But she said, yeah. Monica didn't push. She never did. Okay, she said. Listen, this is wild, but it might be exactly what you need. My boss's neighbor needs help. His nanny left. It's a full-time, live-in thing. Housekeeping and childcare. 1 baby. 9 months. He's private. Works in tech. barely talks to anyone. But the pay's good. You'd have your own room. Food. Heat. And they're desperate. Hannah blinked. A baby? Yes, a real one. Not a robot. Just crying, pooping, little human baby. And a dad who probably thinks wipes solve everything. I don't know how to take care of a baby, Monica. I've never even held one. Monica's voice softened. You held yourself together for 30 years, girl. That's harder. Hannah didn't reply. Her hand brushed over a fabric scrap. Soft cotton. Sea green. She had meant to make a blouse out of it once. Look, Monica continued. I know it's not what you wanted. I remember you talking about your shop, your sewing. But right now, you need shelter. And time. And someone else's grocery bill. Silence stretched. I don't want to lose myself, Hannah whispered. Not again. Monica's voice was quiet. Then don't. Take this, but don't give up the rest. Pack your kit. Bring your thread. Sew at night. I don't care if it's pillowcases. Just don't stop. You hear me? Hannah nodded slowly. I'll send the address, Monica said. You can be on a bus by morning. The call ended. Hannah sat in the dark. The room didn't feel warmer, but it no longer pressed in as much. Like it knew she wasn't staying. She stood, pulled out the small suitcase from the closet, folded clothes methodically. Jacket, sweater, 2 pairs of jeans, socks, toothbrush, and at the very end, she placed the sewing kit on top, then zipped the case shut. Outside, the rain still lashed the window. But when she opened the door, she didn't flinch. She stepped into the storm. And for the first time in months, she wasn't waiting for someone else to save her. She was moving. The bus to Telluride wound its way through the mountains like it was uncertain of its purpose. Snow clung to pine trees, bending them in quiet submission. The air changed as the road climbed. Thinner, cleaner, but less forgiving. Hannah sat in the back, her suitcase wedged against her knees, a cracked window beside her offering glimpses of a life that looked nothing like hers. She hadn't spoken since boarding. Didn't need to. The silence on the bus suited her. Most of the passengers wore ski jackets and headphones, their eyes glued to phones or views that didn't include her. That was fine. She didn't come here to be seen. She came because she had nowhere else to go. The road narrowed as they ascended, then widened just enough to reveal a gate. Tall, iron, ornate. The bus hissed as it stopped. No one else got off. Hannah stepped down into snow that came up to her ankles and stared ahead. A stone path led to a mansion set back among the trees. It wasn't new money glass and chrome. It was old, gray slate roof, tall windows, ivy climbing the stone walls, like the house itself had roots deeper than most people's memories. She adjusted her coat, grabbed her suitcase, and began walking. By the time she reached the front door, her hands were numb and her thoughts were spinning. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten more than half a granola bar since Chicago. The door opened before she knocked. A woman stood there, maybe 50, silver hair pulled into a severe bun, posture so perfect it looked rehearsed. You must be Hannah, she said. Her voice was not unfriendly, but it had sharp edges. Yes. I'm Mrs. Langford. Housekeeper. Been here 22 years. Mr. Whitmore is with the baby. Come in. Hannah stepped inside. The warmth hit her like a wave, almost too much after the cold. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the space. High ceilings. Polished floors. Walls lined with abstract art and tall shelves filled with hardbound books. The house was immaculate, too immaculate. It didn't feel lived in. It felt curated, like everything had been arranged to impress someone who never showed up. Mrs. Langford moved quickly. Your room's upstairs. It's small but warm. You'll be expected to help with household cleaning and light childcare. Baby Sophie has a daytime nanny, but there will be moments. Moments when Mr. Whitmore is unavailable or the nanny's off, and you'll be paid weekly, punctually. She opened a door to a narrow staircase. Come. Hannah followed. Upstairs was quieter, somehow. The air felt thicker. The walls didn't echo, they absorbed. Her room was at the far end, small, neat, with a single bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that overlooked a forest of pines. This is you, Mrs. Langford said. Laundry's on Thursdays. Meals are taken in the kitchen, not the dining room. You're not staff in the formal sense, but don't mistake that for inclusion. Hannah blinked. I'm sorry. Mrs. Langford gave her a long look. Mr. Whitmore is a private man. He values order. He dislikes noise. He does not entertain chaos or sentimentality. Before Hannah could ask what that meant, she heard it, soft footsteps, and the faintest babble of a child. Then he appeared. Caleb Whitmore, 37, CEO, tech innovator, silent mystery wrapped in cashmere. He came into view at the top of the stairs, holding a baby in a white knit sweater against his chest. He didn't look at her at first. His gaze went to Mrs. Langford. "This is the new one?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Hannah Sullivan." He looked then. Blue-gray eyes that didn't ask questions. They calculated, assessed, judged. "You've been briefed?" he asked. "I have," Hannah replied quietly. "Then all I ask is efficiency and silence." He turned and walked down the hall. Sophie blinked over his shoulder at Hannah. Big eyes, curious, solemn. Then the two of them disappeared behind a door. Hannah stood still for a moment, unsure if she was meant to follow, speak, breathe. Mrs. Langford gave her a small nod. "He's not unkind. Just compartmentalized." That night, the wind howled outside. The pines swayed like mourners. Hannah sat in her room, staring out the window. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was sterile, like a museum after hours. Around 7 p.m., there was a knock. Mrs. Langford again. Her face was tight. "The nanny's sick. Fever. I need to take my sister to the hospital. Mr. Whitmore just left for the airport. Can you watch Sophie tonight?" Hannah hesitated. I'll try. She's fed, changed. She may cry when she wakes. Do what you can." An hour later, the crying started. At first, it was soft, a whimper. Then a full wail. Piercing. Sharp. Hannah did everything she could think of. Checked the diaper. Offered a bottle. Held Sophie up to the window to show her the snow. Nothing worked. Finally, she sat on the floor in the living room by the fireplace, pulled Sophie close, and just held her. "There, sweetheart," she murmured. I know this feeling." She wasn't sure if she was talking to the baby or herself. Sophie quieted, still sniffling, but the sharp edge of the cry had dulled. Hannah rocked gently, humming a tune she half remembered from the orphanage. No lyrics, just a rhythm. Soft, swaying, safe. Sophie's head nestled into her chest. Her little hand clutched Hannah's shirt, tiny fingers curling like ivy around a promise. Hannah's body relaxed. She felt warmth for the first time in days, not from the fire, but from the quiet weight of the child breathing against her. Her own breathing slowed. She shifted just enough to grab a throw blanket from the couch and wrap them both in it. Eventually, she drifted off too. That's how Caleb found them. He came home just after 11. Snow still clung to his coat. He entered the living room expecting silence and darkness. Instead, he froze. There, on the Persian rug by the fire, lay Hannah, asleep, arms curled around his daughter. Sophie nestled into her chest, peaceful, unmoving except for the rise and fall of her breath. The woman's brown hair fanned across the pillow. Her boots were off. One sock had a hole in the toe. Caleb didn't move. He hadn't seen his daughter sleep like that in weeks. She looked anchored. He didn't wake them, didn't speak. Instead, he went to the hall closet, retrieved another blanket, and gently draped it over them. Then he stood back and watched. Not with suspicion, with something else. Something older. Something he didn't have a name for anymore. The night they slept by the fireplace was never mentioned. Not by Mrs. Langford, who returned quietly the next morning and found them still curled up on the rug. Not by Caleb, who had watched from the shadows longer than he meant to. And not by Hannah, who woke before dawn, carefully slipped Sophie back into her crib, and retreated to her room without a word. But something shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, just subtly. In the days that followed, Caleb began to linger. At first, it was barely noticeable. A pause at the kitchen doorway. A glance from the hallway as Hannah passed by with folded towels. He never interrupted, never engaged directly. But his presence was no longer clinical. It had texture now. At breakfast, he noticed how she poured Mrs. Langford's coffee before her own. How she wiped down the counter even after it had been cleaned. How she mended the loose thread on Sophie's bib without being asked. Hannah, for her part, said little. She stayed out of his way, kept to her tasks. But she wasn't invisible anymore. Not to the house, not to Sophie, and increasingly, not to Caleb. Sophie responded to her differently, too. The baby's eyes followed her like a tether. She reached for Hannah during meals, settled faster when Hannah tucked her in, giggled more when Hannah sang lullabies with no lyrics. Just soft humming that seemed to come from somewhere much older than memory. One afternoon, while dusting in the hallway, Hannah noticed something odd. The library door was open. It had never been opened before. She hesitated. Mrs. Langford had told her early on, no one entered the library or Caleb's study without permission. Not unless summoned. And Caleb? He wasn't the type to forget a door. Still, she stepped closer. Inside, the room was filled with light, the good kind. Not the cold fluorescence of the main hall, but warm, golden beams filtered through tall windows and heavy drapes. Floor-to-ceiling books. A fireplace with unused logs. A faint smell of wood polish and something more human, like worn leather and silence. Caleb stood at the far end, a book in one hand, eyes scanning its pages. He looked up. "You like to read?" he asked. Not harsh, not demanding, just curious. Hannah blinked, caught off guard. "Yes." "What kind of books?" She stepped in, slowly. "Romance," she said after a beat, then braced herself for a smile or a raised brow. Instead, Caleb simply said, "Why?" Her answer came quicker than expected. "Because the broken ones usually get chosen," she said softly. "Not at the beginning, but by the end. The overlooked ones. The quiet ones. They're the ones who get loved." She looked down as if embarrassed by her own answer. But when she glanced up again, Caleb was staring at her. Not in judgment, in recognition. As if he understood. He didn't reply, just nodded once. That night, when Hannah returned to her room, a book lay on her pillow. Persuasion. Jane Austen. No note. No fanfare. But she knew exactly who had left it. And something in her, a thread long severed, began to stitch itself back together. They didn't become friends. That word didn't fit. There was still too much distance between them. But something had begun. A quiet understanding. A space neither of them rushed to name. Caleb remained Caleb, composed, efficient, wrapped in clean lines and unreadable expressions. But his questions came more often now. Did Sophie eat well? Is that coat new? You used to sew? Each one like a hand reaching out, and then retracting just before it touched anything. Hannah didn't push. She answered when asked, smiled when smiled at. She let the space grow slowly. In the evenings, after her work was done, she began sewing again. Not for money, not for dreams, just to remember how her hands moved when they weren't cleaning up after other people. She stitched handkerchiefs, tote bags, tiny shoes. Sophie's old clothes repurposed into small miracles. Mrs. Langford noticed first, then Sophie, who began choosing Hannah's creations over store-bought ones. And Caleb? He noticed too. One morning, he passed by the sitting room where Hannah sat sewing, Sophie crawling near her feet. He didn't stop, but he glanced down at the cloth in her lap and said, almost too quietly, "You have a good eye." Then he was gone. A week later, Caleb asked Hannah into his study. She froze at the door. No one was allowed in here. The room was his fortress. Dark wood, minimalist decor, 3 monitors on the desk, sketches on the wall that looked like tech prototypes or infrastructure diagrams. Caleb stood near the desk, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. "I'm working on a project," he said. "An app. For single mothers. A space for legal aid, job support, peer forums. Not just theory, real tools. I want it to work from the ground up." Hannah listened, unsure why he was telling her. "I don't want it designed by people who've never struggled," he said. "I need someone who understands what's missing. I want your input." She blinked. "Me? You know the gaps. You've lived them." She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, "I don't have a degree. You have experience." "I've never worked in tech." "I didn't ask for credentials. I asked for perspective." It wasn't a compliment. It was a key. That night, Hannah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was no warmer, but her chest was. She had been seen, and not just as a caretaker. In the days that followed, Caleb began inviting her into meetings, not formally, not as a colleague. At first, just to listen. But soon she was offering suggestions. Her voice was tentative, then stronger. "Make the buttons bigger. They'll be using one hand while holding a baby. Don't bury the help form 3 pages deep. No one will find it. Use warm colors, not sterile ones. These women are already tired of feeling like case files." The team listened. Caleb watched her as she spoke. And when she finished, he didn't say "good job." He said, "That was necessary." She felt the difference. The first real shift came one night when she was rinsing glasses in the kitchen. Caleb entered, not with a question, not with an order, just a presence. "You did well today," he said. His voice was quieter than usual. Hannah didn't turn, just smiled faintly. I didn't think I'd enjoy any of this, but I like feeling useful. There was a pause. I didn't think I'd trust anyone again, Caleb said. But I trust you. She looked at him then. And in that quiet moment, no one reached for anything. No one made a declaration. But the silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty. It was full. The days passed with a rhythm that, while not exactly joyful, had begun to feel real. There were soft mornings with Sophie in the kitchen, her tiny fingers reaching for spoons, giggling at banana peels. There were meetings in Caleb's study, where Hannah's ideas now took up actual space on whiteboards. There were small silences, warm glances, quiet recognitions. No words of love, no plans, but something between them had rooted. Hannah didn't name it. She didn't want to. Some things, when named, disappear. But then, on a morning that began with melted snow and budding pine cones, it happened. She heard the car before she saw it. A different hum from the usual vehicles. Sleeker, quieter. A black SUV pulled into the driveway like it belonged there. It parked in front of the mansion with casual authority. The door opened, and out stepped a woman. Tall, blonde, polished in that effortless, well-practiced way. She wore a caramel leather coat and carried a bag that probably cost more than Hannah's entire wardrobe. Her heels didn't sink into the snow. They skimmed above it, like she'd trained for entrances. Hannah, standing near the laundry room window, froze. She didn't know why her heart raced. 10 minutes later, carrying folded towels upstairs, she heard voices. Caleb's. Low, controlled. A woman's. Softer. Intimate. The door to his study was slightly ajar. She didn't mean to look, but she did. Through the narrow gap, she saw Caleb standing near the window, arms crossed, posture tight. Across from him, the woman, holding Sophie. The baby looked calm, familiar, her little head resting against the woman's chest as if she'd done it before. I didn't come to make things complicated, the woman said, gently stroking Sophie's hair. I just missed her, and I missed you. Caleb said nothing. His silence wasn't cold. It was hesitant. And Hannah, watching from the hall, didn't wait to hear what came next. She turned, walked quickly. Her hands shook as she set the towels down in her room. She sat on the bed and stared at the floor. So that was her. Rachel Monroe. The mother. The past. The place Hannah would never occupy, no matter how many lullabies she hummed or prototype notes she submitted. Suddenly, the house felt different. Bigger. Colder. The sewing kit on her dresser looked absurd. The handkerchiefs she made, the mended sleeve of Caleb's coat, laughably small against a woman like Rachel, who probably never patched anything in her life. And yet, what hurt most wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even rejection. It was the return of a familiar, unwelcome feeling, one that had lived inside her since childhood. You don't belong here. You never did. She thought she had outrun it. But here it was again, sitting beside her like an old companion. That night, she didn't eat dinner. She waited until the house was quiet. Then she wrote a note. Short, careful, honest. Thank you for letting me feel like I mattered, even for a little while. Sophie is wonderful. You're lucky to have her. I wish you both all the best. H. She left it on the kitchen counter. Packed slowly. No dramatic exits. No slammed doors. Just a suitcase, a coat, and the sewing kit she had once thought would stay in this room forever. She closed the front door behind her as softly as it opened. The snow had stopped. The stars were out. She didn't cry. She just walked. Down the path. To the bus stop. Away. She ended up in Portland. Not because it called to her, but because it didn't reject her. The city was kind in a quiet, eccentric way. Art fairs on weekends, mismatched socks on strangers, tiny coffee shops that smelled like cinnamon and second chances. She found a room in East Portland. 200 square feet. Slanted ceiling. No real stove. But the window opened to trees. And in the morning, birdsong found its way in. She set her sewing kit on the windowsill. And every day, she stitched something. Not for income, not yet. Just to remember she was real. One afternoon, walking past a craft fair, she paused at a booth selling embroidered cloths. Her fingers touched the fabric absently. That evening, she sent in a vendor application. 3 weeks later, she set up her own booth, Thread and Grace. Old wooden table, hand-sewn bags, reworked coats, clutches from scraps. She made her first sale to an elderly woman who said, "You stitch like someone who's lived long and loved hard." It wasn't wealth, but it was something more rare. recognition. She began therapy, said nothing in the first 2 sessions. But on the third, when asked, "When was the last time you felt abandoned?" she wept, quietly, for a long time. After that, she returned every week. She spoke of the orphanage, of the families who didn't quite fit, of the night she slept on the rug with a baby who made her feel like home, and of the morning after, when she chose to leave before she could be left again. She began journaling. Every night, she wrote 3 things. A smiling customer, a new fabric discovered, a morning without panic. She still thought of Sophie, still remembered Caleb's eyes, but they were no longer open wounds. They were folded pages, chapters, gentle ones. The day she got her 50th custom order, she stood still at her sewing table. She didn't laugh, didn't cry. She just placed a hand on her chest and whispered, "Thank you." Not to God, not to Caleb, to herself, to the part of her that had walked away not because she was unwanted, but because she finally understood what she did want, to be chosen, and not just when convenient. Time passed differently in Portland. It didn't rush or drag. It drifted, like wind through leaves, like coffee steam in morning light. Hannah found the rhythm soothing, not because it numbed her, but because it asked nothing of her. No expectations, no performances, just breath, stitch, repeat. Thread and grace grew, not fast, but steadily. People came back. They remembered her, asked for custom work, brought friends, shared stories. Hannah listened. Listened like someone who had learned the hard way that most people just need to be heard once in their lives. Every morning, she opened her tiny window, let in the smell of earth and espresso, and sewed. The loneliness still came, but not with teeth. Now it came more like an old visitor, one that sat quietly, respectfully, on the far edge of the bed and waited its turn. She let it stay, but it no longer ruled her. Sometimes she thought of Caleb. Of course she did. She wondered if he'd married Rachel, if Sophie still cried when thunder rolled, if her mended bib still lay folded in a drawer somewhere. But she didn't dwell. That part of her story, like a finished hem, had been stitched closed, clean, without bitterness. Or so she thought. It was late autumn when it happened. The air was crisp. The fair was busy, not swarming, but alive. Leaves crunched underfoot. Children licked caramel apples with sticky delight. Music played from a nearby booth. And Hannah was bent over a piece of pale blue linen, stitching a line of wildflowers into the edge of a tote. She didn't hear him approach, didn't feel the shift in air. Not until the voice came. Low, measured, familiar. Hannah. She didn't move right away, but her hand stopped. Then, slowly, she turned. Caleb Whitmore stood a few feet from her booth, dressed in a dark coat, hair slightly longer, eyes older, but not harder. If anything, they looked more human. She didn't smile, didn't frown either. Her expression was calm, guarded, but not cold. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to find you. You found me." A beat passed. "You left," he said softly. "You didn't stop me." He looked down. That one landed. Another pause. "I didn't know how," he admitted. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. "And Rachel?" she asked quietly. "She's gone. She thought we could fix something that was never real. I thought maybe I owed her that. But I realized," he swallowed. "What I needed wasn't the past. It was the present. And you were already walking out of it." Hannah exhaled. Not in relief. Just truth. "I can't go back, Caleb. I didn't come to ask you to." He stepped forward slightly. "I came to ask if we could start again, not where we left off, but somewhere new. With me beside you, not above you, not hiring you, not rescuing you, just choosing you." Her eyes softened. "Why now?" "Because I lost you," he said. "And only then did I realize I never truly had anything without you." He didn't kneel, didn't reach out, just stood there, fully, quietly, unshielded. And Hannah? She didn't answer with a yes. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped around the table, stood in front of him, and looked him in the eye. "I'll need time." He nodded. "I'll wait." They began like strangers. Walks through Saturday markets, lunches by food trucks, evenings spent reading aloud to Sophie, who now spoke in full sentences and clung to Hannah with a familiarity that had never faded. Caleb didn't rush. He didn't push. He showed up. Every time. They worked together again. This time as partners, true ones. Hannah took over design and user feedback for the app, which had grown beyond expectation. Now serving women in 10 countries, It had become more than a platform. It was a sanctuary. And she, once a girl who patched clothes in silence, was now the heart of its voice. 3 months later, at a weekend market beneath a canopy of twinkling string lights, Caleb arrived at her booth with something in his hand. Not a ring box, a cloth pouch. He opened it and revealed a ring, handmade, embroidered, with thread in the color of twilight and dawn. Inside, it read, "I choose you." He didn't kneel. He whispered, "Only if you still choose me back." Hannah laughed, the real kind. The kind that comes from the gut and the scar and the healed place in between. Then she nodded, and everyone watching, because people were watching, clapped and cried and cheered. Not because it was a proposal, but because it felt like redemption. They married at the fair the next spring. No tuxedos, no orchestra, just neighbors, friends, a few bolts of cloth, some wildflowers. Sophie carried the rings in a crocheted basket Hannah had made during her first month in Portland. They moved into a sun-filled house with too many plants and not enough matching furniture. Hannah was pregnant before the first frost, and this time, she didn't doubt whether she deserved it. Because now she knew. Home wasn't a place you waited to be invited into. It was something you made, stitch by stitch, presence by presence. Sophie, now 3, asked one morning over cereal, "Mommy, why do you smile when you're just sitting there?" Hannah looked at her, then at Caleb, then at the life they had built, imperfect and pulsing with love. And she said, "Because once, I had nothing. And now, I have everything." And so, in a world that once made her believe she was only passing through, Hannah Sullivan finally stopped. Not because someone gave her permission, but because she finally chose to stay.